yeah, first of all, thank you for being here. And basically, just as an opening for today's session, I would like to recap, and before we introduce the guests we have today, I would like to recap the how this whole process began and how we are today holding this conversation as an excuse for addressing this topic. And as you might have seen, we recently released a documentary that's called Brave Now World. And this is a documentary that we co-produced together with NELIS, Next Leaders Initiative for Sustainability, a nonprofit that began in Japan 5 years ago or so, and is becoming quite global. That's mainly about inspiring, connecting, and empowering young leaders in sustainability. And together with Hermanos Brothers, that's an artistic bureau based in Bogota, basically focused on working on media and communication for cultural transformation, precisely. And this whole process began as a series of interviews we did back in the NELIS Global Summit in Japan in 2018. And what we knew back then is that we wanted to, hopefully spread the word of what NELIS was doing without just sticking to talk about an organization, and somehow addressing a broader question that we had back then and that we still have, and has to do with, okay, how can we really connect, inspire and empower people around relevant topics, in this case sustainability. And back then the intuition we had was that perhaps rather than just showing some interviews and inviting some experts and approaching the topic in a more conventional way, we should explore other formats and other languages that would hopefully allow us to reach other audiences. So basically that was the way this whole documentary started taking shape. And what we are having today is what we would have normally after a screening, if we would be able to meet up and have these kind of spaces face to face. So basically we said, okay, this was an online release, but we do want to have a space for just sharing some impressions, as simple as that. And that's the whole idea behind it. So without any further ado, I would like to give it to Martin for you to please introduce our guests and kick it off, Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Lucas. Yes, very, very glad to have this meeting and this selection of very special people accompanying us today. So I'll start in the order that appears me in the screen. We have Susie Kirk Dimitru from UK, theatre producer and arts education specialist. I don't know if you would like to maybe tell us what you're working on right now, or something you'd like to share about you briefly, let's say in 2 minutes, for us all to get to know you a little bit more. Sure. Susie, how are you?
Good, so I work as an independent theatre producer and arts manager in London and occasionally internationally. And throughout my career, I've been working primarily in the area of arts for social development and education. So I work with companies that make mostly theatre by, with and for young people and marginalised communities. So that's my background and particular area of interest. And at the moment, obviously the theatre sector in London is not really alive thanks to COVID, but I'm working for a international touring theatre company, doing some management for them, as well as with international arts and homelessness movement called With One Voice, that looks at using networks around the world to connect arts organisations and homelessness organisations together to try to build build the arts into the integral network of support necessary for homeless people across the world.
Great, Susie, thank you. We have also with us Ian Shimizu from Japan, environmental evangelist and consultant and co-founder of Wimori. Ian, how are you? Welcome, thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Lucas. Thank you, everybody else, for being here and for having me here. Most of what you pulled off my LinkedIn is completely. But yeah, I've been doing environmental work for about 10 years now. My exploration has been how to get people who don't care to care, and for people who do care, to motivate them to take action. So I worked at an organization called 350 and started their Japan division. This is a global grassroots climate change movement building organization that's very much behind the climate strikes that you may have seen around the world. Afterwards, I did awareness raising for about 2 years. I spoke on radio, spoke to children, led some of my own education projects. And now I'm working on a project called Wimori, where I've had a lot of help from NELIS, a lot of help from Lucas and Martin. And what it is it's an app that gives people the power to protect and restore forests around the world. And I think you can see how it's at the very end of my, or it's the culmination of my exploration of how we can mobilize people to take action. As all of you here know, climate change and biodiversity loss are two huge crises we face in the environmental field, and protecting and restoring forests is one of the most powerful ways we can engage in addressing these issues. And what I'm trying to do with this app is showcase the best projects around the world for people to fund with a tap of their fingers, starting anything from $1, $2, $3. We're saying for the cup of a coffee, for the same price as a cup of a coffee, help protect and restore forests around the world, targeting mostly affluent people in the so-called West. And right now we're on Kickstarter, and we are very interested in employing art to spread our message, as well as to engage and mobilize people who have hitherto not taken action. And that's where this time I've gotten Lucas and Martin's help. If you go over to our Kickstarter campaign, which I'm happy to share the link of at any point, you will see that Martin has worked on one of the posters, which we're giving out as one of our rewards. So these kind of art and action, which I call artivism, activism and action together combined with the artivism, is a very main part of our approach. And I watched the film, loved it, so happy to be here. Thank you all for your attention. That's everything from me. Arigato.
Please do share on the chat space those links, Ian, and this applies for everybody. I mean, as you talk, please feel free to share whatever link or contents you find relevant. And also for the rest of the people joining us today, a very warm hello for everybody. Thanks for being here, and please do feel free to share any question that may arise on the way. We'll be having a space for Q&A later on. We already have some questions some people have been sending, but we'll be happy to receive any other emerging questions on the go. Over to you, Martin.
Okay, yes. We also have invited today our friend from India, Ramnath, who also gives his testimony in the film. So those of you who have watched the film may recognize his face. Ram is conservation educator, filmmaker, and co-founder of the Youth Conservation Action Network, UCAN. Welcome, Ram. How are you?
Thank you, Martin.
So good to have you.
So good to be here and see faces. I'm doing very well, thank you. My inquiry began when I was in school, in middle school, and since then it's been a journey to find how to help children practice consciousness and stewardship towards nature, and how to redefine the ways children learn about nature in schools. And I've primarily used two different platforms. One is filmmaking, and then the second platform is experiential learning. At the moment, my partner and I, we run UCAN, and through which we support young people to become nature educators. Our vision is, if there was a nature educator in every community, then we would have a new generation of children and people practicing environmental consciousness and caring for the environment in their community. We have currently, we used to run a fellowship for young people to create and lead eco clubs in schools. It's paused this year, and we are now trying to take the program online to see how we can connect, how we can create the program online without losing the essence of being in a space and sharing the vibe together. I'm so glad to be here, and thank you for the space. Thank you.
Thank you, Ram. Yeah, we're sorting out how physical presence can be, well, resorted to these digital platforms. And we have also Marwa Arsanius right now from Berlin. Marwa, you will correct me if I'm wrong. You come from Lebanon and from the US, and you come from, I don't know, so many places. You've traveled and worked in the world. Artist, filmmaker, and researcher. Marwa, how are you? And please introduce yourself.
Hello. Hey, yeah, you're right. I'm actually now in Berlin. So I'm doing mostly research and film that is has been in the past 5 years more and more connected to questions of land and questions of ecological feminism. So I have worked with many communes and cooperatives who were thinking about and actually practicing certain ways of living together communally and forming communities that are in rural areas mostly and built on reappropriated land. So land that belonged to either like state powers or corporations, or did not have any, or were commons to begin with. So these communities of women have mostly, they are coming from a farmers background, so they are mostly like women farmers. So they recuperated these lands and tried to build communities that are only accessible for women and that are kind of like a separationist. I don't know how you say that in English. Separationist. So they are only inviting female communities that are want to experiment in living, within a certain economy that is a self-sustainable and self-sufficient economy, and mostly like growing their own food and needing very, very little from the outside of what they produce. And at the same time, there is a feminist politics to that. So there's like a very clear feminist politics that intersect with the ecological politics. So it is not a ecology that is, separated from or isolated, or like some kind of ecological, like this kind of like green capitalism, or these green neoliberal ideas of ecology, that it can be separated and isolated from other struggles and then just like, parachuted into some places, into urban environments, into some, like a different places without any grounding and connection with other struggles. So this is my interest, and I'm making films actually. So
Thank you very much, Marwa. And yeah, it's great to be with people doing such great things. And both Martin and I know that because we talked that before we started the session. We're very honored and happy to be able to share some ideas with all of you. And now that we kind of know a little bit about who's here and who's doing what, I would like to start asking you about your raw impressions of this Brave Now World documentary. If there's something that, particularly kind of resonated with you, something that you would like to highlight, and more specifically, something that you related with the current work you are doing at the moment. So these are just some guiding questions. Please feel free to address these general impression section as you feel like. And yeah, we can start, for instance, with you, Marwa. You were telling us about the way you understand the current processes you are into. How did this documentary speak to you, and how would you relate it to what you're doing?
Shall I start?
Yeah, yes.
If you feel like.
Or someone else wants to start?
I mean, however you feel, guys.
Go ahead, yeah.
Okay, I'll kick it off. I think first and foremost, I want to say just amazing production. I mean, before we step into the content, where I would imagine where most of the juicy conversation is going to happen today, I just want to say, like, unbelievable production. Being in this field, I've seen my fair share of, whether it be documentaries or whatever, them, right? The usual suspect. Before the Flood, Al Gore's film, all sorts of different films, as well as the occasional interview series and whatnot. But this one has a completely different, it is on a completely different dimension when considering cultural value. I think the quality of the production, the way that the visuals are positioned against the interviews and the words, and the way that at some point you're not sure if you're being captivated through the concept and the words or the visuals, and you're not really sure how they're agreeing or disagreeing, and you're left wondering. And sometimes there'll just be inserts where you're like not sure if that has depth or if it's just a little play on the words or what it is. You're put it into a kind of like into a trance almost, where you're constantly wondering what's coming next and what that was a moment before. And all of it just provides so much depth in production that it's just absolutely mind-blowing. And then as you watch it, you begin to slowly, as you get into it, you wonder, where the hell is all this coming from? Like, who is the person doing all the hours of research, getting all these rolls of like films from, some of them I've seen, others I haven't seen, and just wondering, like, who has the patience and diligence to dig through this crazy archive of films and put it together in this intricate way. And just so I just want to first and foremost say that the production that has gone into this is completely mind-blowing and unbelievable. And just, I mean, before we get into the content, that just in terms of that, the cultural value it provides is just crazy. I loved it so much. So I just want to kick it off there with a huge celebration for the work that has gone into producing in the way that it has. Just unbelievable, like unlike anything else. Just so great.
Thank you very much, Ian. I think that's mainly Martin's responsibility. He just told me he lost connection. He's in the middle of the countryside somewhere in Colombia, and he lost what you just said, but we are recording it, so you'll have the chance to listen to it later on. Thank you for sharing that. Please carry on.
Yeah. Oh, no, that's me. Everybody else, please chime in. I have a lot more I can say, but I'm just going to leave it there. I first and foremost would love to celebrate what this film has accomplished.
I think I would echo that. As I was watching it, I was reflecting on just how nebulous this idea of sustainability is, and almost everybody who was interviewed mentioned the problematic nature of just the term sustainability and the sheer volume of work and information and challenge that it encompasses. And I think what the documentary really well demonstrates is the role that the arts have in bringing that together and communicating ideas to people that on an academic level can feel overwhelming and can be difficult to pin down, especially when you take something like the conference, which encompasses so very many different people from so very many different backgrounds and circumstances, tackling so many very different challenges on a local and national and global level. I think that's the real power of the arts, is to take something that is so complex and so enormous and bring it together and communicate in a way that allows people to feel. And that's the gateway to understanding, I think. Like you were saying, Ian, there are so many documentaries, so many brilliant pieces of work that can give you enormous amounts of information. But I think for a lot of people who need to be brought on board in changing the ways that people are thinking about living in the world that we're living in, it can be alienating to try to present information in that more traditional format. And I think what this documentary demonstrates brilliantly is that there are different ways of thinking about how we do that will inspire and motivate and bring in people who might not otherwise be part of the conversation.
Thank you, Susie. Any other impressions you'd like to share, Ram, Marwa, perhaps?
Sure. Could I share, Marwa?
I think she didn't hear you. So
okay. Sure. I mean, whenever I watch a documentary as a filmmaker, it's really hard to get connected to the story, because normally documentaries, you tend to look at the technicalities of it, the format of it, and various aspects. But the one that Lucas and Martin produced is very, very relatable, and it's very soothing, and it's an unpretentious effort. Today, whenever I watch films, normally it starts with a drone shot, and then it goes about with all the gizmos and gadgets and, track shots, and everything comes into in between the message. That is really, so, when we watch a film, I always feel that the medium that we are using should not overtake the message. And that is what this film has done. Whether whether we are using theater or a film, it is a medium to take our message to people. And if we communicate it as pure as possible, I think we have done the job as storytellers. And in that sense, when I watched the film, initially when I watched it, I said, oh my God, it's 48 minutes. What am I going to do? Because my attention span is really, really short and I can't sit for 48 minutes. But then when I started to watch it, the first 2 minutes was quite silent, and then that silence is just magical. There's nothing that's so powerful than silence. And that the silence came back again in the 20th minute or the 21st minute. There was a dog that was limping, and then there was a real pause there. And then the pause is just, it adds so much solemnity to the feeling. And I'm so thankful that they didn't push any message down our audience's throats. It's really something that's quite a challenging line to thread, like practice sustainability, take action, do this, do that. It's really a troubling thing for me. I feel that we should present it in a very porous way and let audience get inspired. And threading that line as storytellers, I'm sure it's quite a challenging process, and I'm really thankful that the team has pulled that off. And I agree with Ian's point on collecting all this footage, and that itself, I'm sure the production is a humongous effort to collect it and get the permission and all of that. So it's an incredible effort. And thankfully, when we watch a film, if that effort is not being seen, but you get drawn into the story, and then I feel that you have succeeded as a communicator. That way I really commend. And like one of the questions in that film is, there was a point that where she says, what's the root cause of so much suffering in the world, and how can we create real peace and happiness? And that's one of the lines that comes in the film by one of the sustainability practitioners, and kind of really resonated with the time that we are living in right now. What's causing so much suffering in the world, and how can we create that peace and happiness? If that is seeded in the mind, and then if the audience is able to take it forward, I think you have done that justice to that question. So I really commend that effort. I know that it's been a process of maybe a year or more probably, and it's actually I think it's like delivering a baby. I know that it's real. I cannot talk about that, but it's a great effort, Lucas and Martin. Finally, to end with, if I had to use that film for an educational purpose, if we decipher the approaches and the content of the people talking in that film, and if we can help the communities practice that, be it engaging with the dialogue, be it striking a balance between capitalism and conservation, if we can decipher those values of that film and what people are talking about, and if people can implement that in their communities, I think that's going to create local change. And I feel the film can be used as a medium for that. So I thank you both and the larger team and the people who have worked on this to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing, Ram, especially bearing in mind that it comes from a filmmaker and educator as you are. That's very nice to hear. Thanks a lot for sharing. Marwa, from your side, you're also a filmmaker, and I'm pretty sure you've been exposed to this kind of pieces in different occasions. Any particular impression you would like to share with us?
I
was just gonna say,
sorry.
I interrupted you. Sorry. Feel free to, express whatever you felt about it. Even if there are, of course, critical opinions about it, this is an open space.
Right. I think Martin is also disconnected again or something.
Yeah, I think he's having some issues with his connection. But yeah, probably he's trying to make it work. So I think we can carry on, and he'll be back hopefully in a bit.
Yeah. So I have a few questions rather. I think it's what you're trying to do is quite interesting. I think it's there are a few questions that come across, and the first one is. I would like to understand more how you use this footage, from where did you get this archival footage, and why this particular footage. So there's a lot of archival footage that's coming from, I don't know, could be an archive in like film archive or media archive or TV archive in, I don't know, from the US or from, so I am not sure where this archive is coming from, a lot of it. And this, I start to question, not for all of it, but many, for example, from the black and white archive, or even like some maybe you found in news, like, I don't know, for example, there's some Al Jazeera things, there are some like, so I guess that you have collected different archive, but the question is, so my question is if you could explain a bit more about this archive and the reason why you selected this in particular. And Another question would be, what do you want me to get from this? So what are you trying to, talk about in particular? Because here I see many different, let's say, a collection of topics. I do not see like one thing. I know it's all interconnected, but I try to understand more what is there like a particular question you want to focus on as well. So this is my second question. So I think these two questions are kind of interrelated, because I see that sometimes it is quite broad. And this is actually, maybe this is what you want. So this could be the intention. But at the same time, this is falls more into a media language. So, and then I would differentiate between documentary making and, like a media kind of film, or a film that is aimed to reach out, to a broader media. Or so I just open these questions also for discussion. But I would like to hear from you a little bit more about the way you have thought about, the material, and also the questions you have thought about. And there's also a question about the people you interview. So I mean, geographically it's very broad, and also like the archive itself is also very broad, and the interconnected questions are very broad. So that's why my question is, what do you want me to get exactly from that? Because in fact, there is a specificity to location as well. So it's not, like, it's very interesting to juxtapose all these places, but there is a specificity to location and the politics of each location. Otherwise, we fall into some kind of equating everything. So the same problem that, the same ecological problem that, some people in North America are kind of like, dealing with, is the same in Colombia, or is the same in, I don't know, in Lebanon, for example, or in some Middle Eastern countries, or which is not the case, I suppose, because the layers and the nuances and the different politics and the different kind of, power politics around the world as well. If you want to think about these different geographies, the way they are interconnected is not they are not on the same ground. So, so I suppose that planet is not flat if you want to think about it visually. So it's not like we cannot flatten this surface and just hang it on the wall as a map and then connect these different places. There needs to be a layering and the nuance. Otherwise, we lose the politics of, otherwise we are doing ecology without politics, and then we fall back into very like neoliberal way of thinking. So these are my questions, just to open the conversation. Yeah.
Thank you, Marwa. And that relates directly with one of the questions that, in fact, we had received, and it's part of the next sort of Q&A section of today's conversation, because somebody sent us a question precisely asking us about the kind of the process behind the film. They wanted to get some insight into the creative process, also highlighting the intention behind the film. So it's a perfect connection with that point. And I think that maybe Martinez, he's back now. Maybe you didn't hear the first part of Marwa's question, Martin, so I'll briefly do the recap. She was asking about the footage, the how the why, from where did you take that footage from, and kind of asking about this whole archive that was used, visual archive that was used for the film. So maybe you could start by addressing that perhaps more technical aspect, and then we can connect it to the other part of Marwa's question that had to do with the intention and somehow the overall question that underlies the documentary. Still there, Martin? Nope. He's still okay. So I'll start by the other part. I cannot talk a lot about the archive sort of archaeology, because that was exclusively Martin's work. I mean, he had a couple of assistants, but he was the one leading the visual process. I can do talk about the intention behind it, and somehow I was also quite involved in the kind of narrative we wanted to build. And understanding that, of course, the whole technical aspect was serving that purpose. So hoping that Martin can reconnect again, I'll start by mentioning that overall question that we had behind the documentary. And basically, as Susie was highlighting a moment ago, the whole question began from acknowledging that right now the concept of sustainability, it's quite a trendy word that is quite a political correct word in many contexts, and that in many occasions it's quite void because it has become so used that perhaps it's not very clear what's behind it, and it's both an academic concept in some spaces. It's also kind of the flagship of many private sector organizations that are trying to showcase themselves as environmentally and socially aware. So that was kind of the burning question we had at the beginning. And taking into account that the whole narrative started to build itself around this NELIS network, which is basically, as I said at the beginning, a network that aims to connect and inspire and empower young leaders in sustainability. We thought that could be not only a good starting point, but a common thread throughout the whole storytelling exercise we were getting into. And in that sense, we thought it was a good idea, and that's why also we showcase different cases that, as Marwa was highlighting, I fully agree that they don't necessarily share many aspects, and that the kind of political context and the aspects of each context have a lot to do. We do thought that by showcasing the different ways in which actual processes were taking place, and the way in which, more than an abstract concept, in many places you could find people just going back to whatever roots they had, or just actually by the exercise of doing and somehow remembering how things used to be, that was already showing that value of the concept and the multiplicity of meanings that it may have. And in that sense, the intention behind was, we can even if every context has a different history, a different situation, different challenges, by highlighting how different processes are taking place, hopefully we would be able, in the first place, to show that diversity, and at the same time kind of that sort of common understanding within that diversity, and in spite of that different historical and political characteristics. So that was something that was present since the beginning. And also we really wanted to do a piece that, rather than showing the critical state of what we're facing, because as Ian was saying at the beginning, there's a lot of those, and although I feel they are very informative in some cases, and it's very important to start by getting informed and perhaps going beyond the surface in terms of what we are, in terms of the information we're constantly receiving. We also wanted to to create something that was not paralyzing, that was not highlighting necessarily responsibles, but showcasing how individuals from different walks of life in rural areas, urban areas, with different social realities, they were actually doing stuff, and they were actually being able to at least to change their immediate contexts in some aspects. And that was the spirit underlying the whole purpose behind the documentary, to hopefully be able to share a story in a way in which ended up being to some extent inspiring, and to some extent empowering, and somehow showing those communalities and those common challenges that we share in spite of our differences. So I guess that that would be kind of an initial sharing of the intention behind. Are you back, Martin? Can you hear us?
Yes, I'm back. I'm so sorry. My internet is kind of comes and goes. So I got a little bit of the question, Marwa, and you were trying to recapitulate for me. So I don't want to maybe repeat already what you said. I don't know if you talked about this, but like to answer that question, I guess the starting point was again also the interviews we made in Japan at the summit, and I'd like to say that maybe that's also why it's important. Yeah, like the documentary is like a short glimpse and encapsulates very succinctly and gives like a very brief introduction to, and that's why it was so important for me as maybe a interviewer and a recompiler of these thoughts and words, to publish also through the same channels, like the complete interviews and the complete chunks of the interviews we had with the people that talk, because I think it of like this sort of escalated contents, right? So it, once you get to know a little bit, and you're like picked to get to know more, to have the possibility to access to those other, like this kind of linking process of expanding on, hey, this mini giant talks about rejuvenating a river. I want to know more about that, so I can go and okay, there's the flow partnership. What's it about? That I think that's a very rich quality of these sorts of communicational devices. And so, beginning with that, those interviews and those images that the people talk about and the organizations they refer to were kind of the initial pivot to start inquiring through the internet, through the channels of these organizations, images that could go along. I would have to say that methodologically, and this makes me think of Ram's observation about the silence. What we first did was making these like the audio, like an audio threading, like the knitting of the conversation. How could the different like this polyphonic puzzle of the interviews together? And once that was made, I afterwards kind of also made my own criticism of that particular methodology, but it was kind of the case in here. So in the process, okay, you go along. On top of that was the process of thinking, okay, what sorts of images could go, what sorts of images can strengthen and reinforce the power of what these people are saying, and at the same time, not only like saying the same, but also playing along with maybe images that not necessarily opposite, but different images that together with their words could make different sorts of meanings and create like this third and fourth and fifth and sixth, other meanings for interpretation, playing with that. And so I would say the process was very, very, very free in that freeness of interpretation. I guess I went, I mean, that research of images went, as I say, through internet, looking at these organizations and inquiring, okay, who's doing similar things, and who's talking about, I don't know, veganism, and searching around. And also, I guess it was all kind of going back to images that throughout my life I've had in my mind. So maybe that's why, for example, there are animations, Norman McLaren's images appear in a couple of moments there, because like very images that had impact, and for one reason or another, when trying to picture what could go there, it just triggered their yeah. And then after that, okay, that was the whole process that also took quite a long time to write to those sources, contact them, tell them what the project was about, and asking for the permission to use them publicly. And that was really nice too, like part of the process and part of the liveliness of it, that it's not just like working alone and me from like my little cubicle studio grabbing this and that, but also having the possibility to engage in well, I wouldn't say real conversation, because that non-directness is already for me real, and that's kind of the power of having a conversation through images and through art with other people without the necessity to like being in life, like in present tense. It surpasses, it goes over that time and space. But it was very empowering and inspiring to being able to talk to them and get to know more about them, and then receiving and responding and building from there and expanding. And this is also kind of part two of that same process, and it goes, it's like the ripple. So yes, I don't know.
And following that same thread, I would like to ask, we're quite an intimate group, so I will also like to open the mic in case there's somebody willing to share an impression. What's the intention that as viewers you felt that was somehow supporting this film? Because of course one thing is what we intend, but each viewer may have a different interpretation of that specific question. So I think that could be a nice follow-up question to Marwa's inquiry. Anybody feeling like sharing the intention?
Oh yeah,
felt?
there was like a little tiny timid hand.
Javier,
Please.
welcome on board. Thanks for being here, and please do share with us.
Thank you so much, Lucas and Martin, for this space, and thanks to you and to everyone who was involved in this piece. And just very briefly, I'd like to share that I kind of like began looking at this as a documentary film, then realized I was engaging with a work of art, more generally speaking, and then ended up having a very personal, almost like meditative experience in which I felt that the message was actually what I was going to get out of engaging with this content without there being any, like what you're saying of finding like the common threads in the diversity of what was being represented. It was like a job for me to do. So I kind of like really liked this thing. I think it was Rama that was saying a while ago that it wasn't like pushing anything down the throat. Because as soon as you started to believe that a message was being transmitted, suddenly like a new voice, a new image, the silence, would lead me to like question what the message was and to get into the mood of actually reflecting what this meant for me and in my practice and in my action. So this is my contribution. I know that like in the academics of art, we like to like put pieces in boxes and like categorize and like maybe describe with like to put a little bit of order on what is going on. But I found it very pleasurable to like not understand a little bit and to like be questioned and like meditate while I was hearing things and just be like engaged with the people that were behind producing this. So yeah, that's it. I'll leave the question, is this really a documentary? Because I sometimes wonder when you conceive and describe it as a documentary, there's a diversity within the documentary category that I would need to explore more. I am far from being an expert at all. But this is very different. Maybe I'd like to know if there are references in the documentary film, you know, that you are kind of like being inspired by, or are you creating something that was like entirely yours in a way, and you are calling it a documentary just to put it inside a category with expectations?
Martin, you wanna take on that? Thank you, Javier.
No, I like right now in the moment, I wouldn't know maybe what specific other examples of documentaries may have a similar narratives or similar formal approaches. Yeah, the category, I mean, it documents. It's not fictitious, right? And actually, there's a moment where I still because I couldn't actually get the premises right with who makes the Ilha de las Flores, Brazilian, very recommended, the Flower Island from the 60s, 70s, short documentary that talks about this is not a fiction film, right? And it appears the text there. So I guess that's a starting point to maybe do call it a documentary. And but it also kind of relates, maybe from my experience or from what I know from the mediums, with when people talk about like essay, a video essay, in the sense that there's the attempt of threading a particular thought thread, right? And of trying to explore, and at the time that like the maker explores, making that questions part of what the viewer is also experienced. So kind of that openness of the process and that sincerity towards the question itself, towards the material. I guess that also makes part of the nature of the exercise. Thank you.
Anybody else would like to share an impression regarding that question about the intention behind it?
Yes, Ian
Yeah,
has a voice.
I want to really second what Javier said around how it didn't really fit into any box clearly. And what I'm really celebrating about this with my experience of the film is kind of coming from more of like a phenomenology perspective. What I mean is that I really celebrate the fact that this type of film exists in the medium that it exists. What I think it really does is that it provides diversity in the way that these messages are being communicated. And I celebrate the fact that that exists in the form that it exists, that there is this visual collage type of work that is carrying this type of message now exists in the world through the work of Martin. Is just a beautiful phenomena to be happening right now today. Because, you know, I think within the fields that we each work in, there's an expectation, there's a myth, there's a certain dogma that says that, for example, somebody like me who's an environmental activist, there is a type of environmental activist or the perfect vision of an environmental activist, which is a box that I should fit in. And I think in many cases that exists also for environmental films, environmental documentary. And I think what this film has done so brilliantly is totally shatter that box, like as if it never existed. So the fact that this film exists as a phenomena in the way and medium that it does, I think is beautiful. And I think it really opens doors to new viewers who I hopefully someday arrive at this film to say, wow, like this is allowed. Like this is okay. Like this way of communicating this message is possible, is powerful, and is something that I'm interested in. And I think it being able to just tick those boxes in itself is wonderful. So that's first and foremost what I want to say. Is it the most effective medium in communicating certain aspects of the story most precisely? Does it tick all the boxes of political correctness? Does it really do a good job of illustrating some of the concepts most accurately in a kind of textbook style way? Then definitely not. But is the value of this film placed there? Also definitely not. So more than anything, I really just want to celebrate the phenomena that this thing exists today, and that it opens doors for new creators to step into this space and have the confidence to say that existed, and I want to build upon that. And now I want to create this really weird, crazy film about similar themes, and I'm not going to have to feel like I'm outside of a box because there's this creator who confidently stepped outside of the box before. And I think there's so much liberation in that. And that's really what I want to celebrate. And how I feel about these discussions in general is that it's always more important to work on the next thing than to critique the one that exists. So I'm really, really excited about what's going to come after this and who this is going to inspire in the future and what kind of creation this is going to instigate in the future. So yeah, I think I've said enough to show that I'm very excited in general. But yeah, that's what I wanted to say on top of what Javier has already shared. And yeah.
Thanks.
And I mean, I was clearly inspired. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing in. And yeah, taking into account the time constraints that we have, I would like to carry on. Perhaps we can, pick up on this in the coming questions as well. Is there any particular example of inspiring artistic actions or interventions or ways of actually packing and presenting in, let's call it, an artistic way, whatever that may mean, that you find relevant to share with us? Like, is there any project that perhaps you've seen recently or that you envision happening at some point where you think that actually incorporating, let's call it, any artistic channel or way of communicating may add some value or added some value in case you have seen it that you feel like sharing in this space right now?
I would love to share the reward that I actually created together with Martin's help as well for the Kickstarter campaign, but I don't want to be the one to continue talking. So I'm happy to share whichever point.
I think that there's something, maybe Adam Curtis. Adam Curtis. You've seen his documentaries. Yeah.
Some faces nodding.
Okay.
Yes, no, yeah. Apparently some are familiar with it, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think Javier knows. And maybe Martin as well.
Yeah.
But so anyway, I think this is a very relevant example to documentary filmmaker working for BBC, and he actually used a lot of the BBC archive to do his documentaries that were commissioned by BBC, obviously, and were screened on BBC. So they were like these kind of TV documentaries. He's, I think, very brilliant in the way he connected narratives, like these kind of global narratives and kind of like global politics and relations of power and all of that. And I think in that way he was really brilliant in building these narratives, and I think that it could be very interesting for you guys to look at that.
Thank you, Marwa. Anybody else?
It perhaps doesn't quite answer the question you're asking at the moment, but my observation of the film, I'm kind of slightly hesitant to call it a documentary because, as we were saying, it doesn't really fit that genre in some respects. But my overall impression is that it's like a lot of kind of contemporary work across all kinds of fields in the arts. It feels much less about delivering a message and much more about existing as a provocation and an invitation to an audience to engage in some way. And what I think it does brilliantly, and what art of that nature does brilliantly when it works, is gives an openness to people, for people to engage on whatever level and through whatever avenue feels comfortable and interesting or provocative to them. So, you can watch the documentary and you can take down the names and the organizations of everyone who's interviewed, and you can research them and you can engage and you can support their work and go as far as connecting and donating and getting really involved. Or you can hear a piece of music that resonates with you and see it in the credits and look at the journey of how that's come to be in this. Do you know what I mean? There's a way in for everybody to a piece of work at whatever level people are willing to engage. And I think that's where this format has something over perhaps a traditional documentary format, because you can be anybody from any background with any interest, be it that you think you're interested in the arts or you're not, or you think you're interested in the environment or you're not. There's some way in. And I think that's an interesting format to consider, and that's something that the sector as a whole really needs to get to grips with if we want to engage on a global level with people from all backgrounds, from all communities, with all levels of interests and investment. That's something that everybody needs to get to grips with, is how to speak broadly.
Thank you, Susie. Okay, I would like knowing that, we have still some minutes left. There was a reflection that we had at some point with Martin that I would like to open it right now, and hopefully that could be kind of the finalizing thread for our conversation. And it has to do with the role that media plays at the present moment, media and the different purposes that it may serve. So as you might have realized when watching when checking the name of the film, the Brave New World novel written by Aldous Huxley back in 1932 was kind of the initial inspiration for the title and somehow the spirit behind what we initially thought as a film product. And back then, I don't know if you recall, probably you read that book at some point in high school or later on. There was this soma, which was a drug that basically had the role back then of creating subconscious indoctrination while people were sleeping. And later on, you can find, for instance, there's a guy named Neil Postman. He has a book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And somehow he kind of recaps on that principle and talks about the role played by television and media entertainment as contemporary versions of that soma that Huxley presented in the book. And basically right now, there are people talking about how we live in an ocean of information with just 1 centimeters of depth, and how right now in this whole context where we are surrounded by fake news strategies, mainstream shows and channels that are actually somehow leading the way in terms of the way people are relating and understanding the world. We have this kind of general question about the way in which we can reappropriate of media, and the way in which we can envision strategies to eventually apply a different intention to the way we use media. So I would like to pose that question. I don't know if you want to build on that, Martin, before opening the space, and to just know your take on that potentiality that we may find in media, knowing that at the same time is a very powerful channel when aligned with the prevalent power and people that perhaps are interested in controlling rather than emancipating. Would like to add something to that, Martin? We can't hear you.
Sorry, maybe just the fact that this relates in the introduction. Many of you talk about that relation between arts and education, for example, and nowadays it is being spoken of arts education. So that linkage between communication and education, and maybe that that possibility that art gives from being able to, as you were saying before, to build up from inside, right, and to construct meaning, and to transform that meaning into action, but from really like the core, that first territory, which is like oneself. Maybe art gives that possibility. So I would link that question you pose about like strategies and ways, not only from the media, to point out like the fallacies of the current like malformational mechanisms which media is suffering, like from I don't know, political and economical powers, but reinventing or reimagining ways. I imagine, for example, these sorts of conversation, online conversation, like TV shows, the fact that, hey, we are, in fact, and it may be obvious, but sometimes it isn't, of making our own spaces to share and our TV shows. We don't need necessarily from the top to come. So I would link that those two things.
So any thoughts on quite a broad question? I guess it's just kind of an input for the final reflection. And yeah, if you have any thoughts to share, either regarding that education thread or the mainstream media, other sort of input, yeah, please feel free to share, or whatever else. We are almost wrapping up, so please go ahead, Ram.
I'm not really a big fan of mainstream media because most of it's very, very curated content, and you don't know what they're saying is right or wrong. But I do feel that there is a tremendous need to anchor the content in integrity and authenticity. That's because most of the content that's being produced right now is very, very biased, and it's there is a need to bring back integrity and authenticity in the media that we produce and in the mediums that we use. And also at the same time, I feel when I look at the efforts of Martin and Lucas, and when I look at it from a local point, there needs to be a more content in the local sense. I'm not talking about platforms like Netflix or Amazon and all that, but I'm talking more about local media. If I tune into a channel that's showcasing something in my rural context, and if I see something that's showcased in the larger global perspective, there is a huge gap of difference. So I feel that we need to really work with storytellers who are grassroots storytellers, local storytellers, and empower them to share their stories in their own local platforms. That I feel would create a lot more relatability to people, and also will communicate so many stories that are locally relevant, that are not being heard in places outside. That's, I feel, when we look at media from media for sustainability from the local angle, I think there is a lot of scope for that. I know that I'm speaking in an abstract idealistic concept, but I feel that we need to really look at that.
Thank you, Ram. Any other insight?
I'll be happy to share really short, Ali, but I really think telling our, information kind of works in a sense like a magnet. I think the really important thing is that we increase the magnetism of this sphere. And recently, I think people are feeling that certain areas that had a really strong magnetic power are starting to wean. For example, concept of growth, I think, is starting to lose its magnetism. And you see that the concept of degrowth is starting to increase its magnetism. And so I've always been wondering, how can we increase the magnetism of this field, of this sphere, so we can attract more people? And I think one way that's done is by enrolling more people to tell their stories at the local or at whichever level. And I think what this art piece that we've been talking about today in particular does is that it has increased the magnetism of the stories that we are trying to tell, or this sphere of thought and being, to completely new audiences because of the unique way that it has pursued in telling its story. And I think it all comes back to increasing the magnetism of the work that we're all dedicated to. So I think it's going to be impossible for any of us to say we need to change the stream of media or that we need to stop the stream of media. But what we can do is increasing the magnetism of the world which we like to find ourselves in. So, yeah, it just comes down to everybody being another magnet and doing what they can so that people are drawn to this side. And again, I want to repeat that I think what this particular piece we've been talking about today will definitely draw new people because it's taken on a new approach. And I think that's really the beauty of it.
Thank you, Ian. Anybody else? Susie, please.
Yeah, I think we absolutely can change the streams of media and communication, but that's going to happen with a generational shift. And what's vital is that if we are to change the way that mainstream media functions and what it communicates, we have to work now with the youngest people in our society to teach them to think critically about what they receive. And certainly, I mean, I can't speak for the countries that you guys are operating in, but certainly in my country under a conservative government for the last decade, what's really being done in our education system is stripping out the elements of education that teach young people to think critically in the ways that would allow them to absorb media in a way that is more critical and a healthier way of understanding things. So that's what I feel like is the job of a lot of people like me, is to take what we do in the arts and take that to the youngest people in our society to help them to learn how to think and criticize and question the world around them, because that's what the arts does. It teaches you to think creatively. It teaches you to think beyond yourself. It teaches you to think about in a collaborative manner, and it teaches you to interrogate. And that's what's lacking in the current think space, is the ability to interrogate what you're absorbing. And so that's where I think an enormous amount of focus needs to be placed now if we're going to shift as we go forward, is teaching young people how to question the world around them and how to question what they receive and to shift and change the narrative themselves. And that has to come from an innate respect for creativity as a part of being human. It's about enabling people to understand that the arts is not learning to play the violin and performing in a philharmonic orchestra. It's that as well, but the arts exist because they're an innate part of being human. It's the way that we try to communicate ourselves. And so teaching young people to see how that exists in absolutely everything that surrounds them, and how to use that creative thinking to question and interrogate and drive forward the world around them is what will help us to see a shift in the way that media is produced and consumed.
Thank you, Susie. Marwa, any final thought from your side?
Not really, not something specific. I just would like to emphasize maybe that I understand coming from media or coming from like art mediation, it's a different perspective than making art or making films. And I guess that also one needs to be wary of not instrumentalizing art as well for certain purposes. I think that's important. I mean, I understand like art mediation as a practice is about mediating to larger audiences a piece of art or a film or whatever. But I guess that art mediation and art institutions cannot ask from artists to have a job doing, like shifting things around. Or I think this comes from within the art language, and it comes from within, shifting the language of film and shifting and they have to follow somehow in their practices. I would say same would apply for media as well, and for, even if you have like a broad sense of what you want art to do, and you think that it can shift, as Ian was calling it, magnets or information magnets, or I think this is not art's problem actually, or it's not art's job, let's say. Yeah. It's someone else's worries. So I think that this is something to be wary about in these kinds of conversations.
Yeah, and I would quickly add to that I guess it's also up to whatever each artist or art creator feels, like I totally agree in terms of that kind of openness in terms of how we interpret the role of the art we do. And I guess that as there might be people, understanding their artistic creation or their artistic language as a media for, and perhaps they have a conscious decision of instrumentalizing it in a way that makes sense for them as well. That's clearly not the case for everybody. And I think that's something that we, of course, need to take into account, as you were highlighting. Ian, go ahead. Final words.
One last thing, very short. I wanted to add on what Susie was saying. And I think the key word is media literacy as well. When we're talking about media, is that like everything else, like politics, like the rest of the world, there's a lot of power dynamics in the media, which we also do have to be aware of, because if you're a powerful company with a lot of money, you can influence the media by getting programs that are in your interest, or you can use advertisements which you are in your interest. And if we categorize all these, every program that has some external influence or sponsorship that gives certain voices a larger megaphone, I think we do have to always be aware that there are these interests which come fundamentally down to who has more money, which does influence the information that we get. So I just wanted to share that as another aspect, in addition to the magnet thing, which is that we can contribute by being a magnet ourselves and making that magnet stronger. But when, as a viewer, we have to also be aware that a lot of power dynamics are entangled with this whole topic of media. Just wanted to add that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Susie, you wanted to say something as well, or I imagined it?
No, I was waving bye to Mama.
Yeah, we already went a little bit over the initial time frame, and from on behalf of NELIS and Hermanos Brothers, in this case represented by some of us, not only Martin and I, Ian and Ram, they're also quite into NELIS. Susie, she's our hermana sister, and yeah, I can see other familiar names. Thank you very much for opening the slot in your agendas. And this was what we wanted, a short, informal conversation, being able to share some ideas. And I think it's a really valuable exercise. And once again, thank you very much for your space, for being here, and the people who participated. Thanks a lot for joining us. Martin, if you want to say something, please go ahead. We can't hear you.
I repeat your words, deep gratitude. I think this exercise is, it expands the conversation, and it maybe reminds us of the things. Like that's the idea. Like each and every day is like reinforcing that in which we believe, and it's great to feel tuned with other perspectives and other feelings. So yeah, thank you very much. It was great.
Lovely. So that would be it. I think we can call it a wrap. And yeah, please keep safe. Thank you very much, and hopefully keep in touch through the different spaces and channels we can meet.
Definitely.
A good one. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. So nice to meet you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.